Hi and welcome to Swedish Plant Guys. We get a lot of questions from our viewers, which is so much fun. And we try and answer them in a video like this, a Q&A video, because we don't have the time to answer your questions in writing, because it needs a full novel to be able to explain so thoroughly that you can actually be helped by what we say. So we try and make these videos instead, and we try to bundle together a lot of questions into one. So even if we're not answering your question, we could be answering your question. So listen to what the question is, and maybe I'm also answering your question. Okay? Perfect. Now, starting off with question number 1. I saw somewhere that when you mist cheese plant, the Monstera Deliciosa, the layer of water on top of the leaf reduced photosynthesis and ultimately damages the plant. Is this true? Okay, so I have a Monstera Deliciosa here. And the question is, if you mist this plant, will it actually damage the plant? Now, I say in our video, we have a video, all you need to know about Monstera Deliciosa. I say that it is positive to mist this plant if you have the time to do it. But I've also heard this before, that it should be something negative. Now, this is how it works. If you mist the plant during the wrong time of the day, yes, it could hurt the plant a little bit. But so when you mist, let's do like this. When you mist your plant, always mist it in the morning before it gets too hot. Because if you start to mist a plant when the sun is out, it is really hot, what happens is that as you mist the plant, you can damage it a little bit. Because when you put a layer of water on top of the plant, when the sun hits that water, the water can become hot, and there is a small reflection to this that can hurt the plant a little bit, yes. But in all other cases, if you mist the plant in the morning, or if you mist the plant when it's not sun out and it's not very, very hot, it all almost exclusively only have positive effects. So if you just follow that instructions and you mist the plant in the morning or when it's not hot, you should also never mist the plant during the evening or at night, because most plants are not active during the night. So if you missed it then, what could happen is that you could get a problem with the plant being very humid all night long. You could get some mold on the plant. So never mist it at night, never mist it when it's too hot or very, very sunny. Then you mist it during the morning instead. Then you just have positive effects of it. Question number 2. This year I decided to use warm compost for most of my indoor and balcony plants. I mixed them up with potting soil in the recommended ratios. Do I still need to fertilize my plants with liquid fertilizers, or is the warm compost enough for a while? I would like to avoid over-fertilizing if possible. Very good question. Now, if you've done this job, that you have added warm compost. Now, warm compost is actually what happens when a worm, thank you, when a worm is digging through the soil. The warm compost is actually what it is pooing in the other end. What's coming out of this is the warm compost, and that has a lot of nutrients in it. So when you're adding it, it is a organic type of fertilizer. Very, very good. I highly recommend using warm compost. If you add this to your soil, what you're actually doing is that you are adding fertilizer to the soil, in the same way as if you were adding manure to your soil. That is also another way to add fertilizer to the soil. So do you need to use a liquid fertilizer? Well, that depends on what it is you are growing. If you are growing like tomatoes or something that is very, very active during a short period of time to produce a lot of flowers, a lot of fruits, or if you're just growing an indoor plant like this Samiculcas here, there is a huge difference in how much fertilizer they need. So I would say for the indoor plant, you probably won't have to fertilize for a very long period of time, liquid fertilize in a long period of time. But if you are growing tomatoes or something that needs quite a lot of fertilizer, then yes, you could add fertilizer to this. So it's completely depending on what you are growing and why, and what your purpose with this is. If you want a lot of fruits, or if you just want to have a happy indoor plant. Question number 3. Now this is concerning the video we've done, all you need to know about Ficus lyrata or fiddle leaf fig. Is the bambino variety capable of growing into a large tree with a thick trunk? Now in that video we show that there are 2 different types of Ficus lyrata, the normal one and the bambino. Now the bambino has smaller leaves and they also grow a little bit closer together, so you get a more bushy, little bit smaller variety of the fiddle leaf fig than the normal one that has huge leaves and a lot of space in between the different branches. Now, is the bambino variety capable of growing into a large tree? Yes, it is. It will take a little bit longer for the bambino to become large, but it will eventually become large. However, neither the bambino or the normal fiddle leaf fig is ever going to get a thick trunk. They usually have quite small trunks for the size of the plant, if you compare it to a lot of other exotic plants. So the stem will probably never be really thick. It will continue to be quite small, but there is no difference between the bambino variety or the normal variety. Question number 4, and this is concerning our video, all you need to know about Monstera Deliciosa. And the question is, I had a large Deliciosa that was unfortunately attacked by thrips. I was only able to save the younger leaves, which hadn't developed any fenestrations, and still haven't after almost a year. And I don't understand why, because most leaves that were being put out by the mother plant came with immediate fenestrations. Now, first of all, what is fenestrations? I have a Monstera here, and the fenestrations are actually these big holes in the leaves. And if you have a plant like this, you actually want this, because this is what makes the Monstera into a Monstera. It's when you get these big fenestrations. Now, as you can see on this plant, this is quite a large plant, but there are not many leaves that have fenestrations yet. Now, what I think here in this question, what I think has happened here is that when your plant got attacked by these pests, by the thrips, you said you were able to only save the youngest leaves. What I think you mean by that is that the big leaves here, you had to take them away. And what you have left are these leaves down by the bottom of the pot, or down by the pot. These are not actually the younger leaves. These are the oldest leaves. And in a Monstera, when it grows, the first leaves that come out from the soil almost never have fenestrations. Now, there is another type of Monstera that gets fenestrations immediately, but the normal variety of Monstera Deliciosa doesn't get that. And you can see that quite clearly on this plant, because this plant is thriving and it's growing. However, almost none of these leaves have fenestrations yet. But when this plant becomes older and the leaves become bigger and bigger, at some point they start to get these fenestrations. So if what has happened to you is that all of the bigger leaves have gotten trips, you had to remove those, and you only have these leaves left that are actually the oldest leaves, they will never get fenestrations because they're not meant to have fenestrations. But as your plant continues to be better and continues to survive from this attack, the new leaves that are coming out and becoming bigger and bigger will eventually get fenestrations again. You don't have to worry about that, but it can take quite a long time because your plant has been really injured and it won't start to grow fiercely again until it's really, really well. So just keep on doing what you're doing, and I promise you that the fenestrations will come. But the leaves that doesn't have fenestrations will never get fenestrations. Question number 5. I'm going to be using Lechuza pon as my substrate, as I cannot get your product, and I think she's referring to pumice, in Canada. Do you know if this product is good? Do you have any other suggestions? We have quite a lot of experience of the Lechuza pon, and I think anybody all around the world can get a hold of the Lechuza pon. So this is a very good question. Is that a good product? Well, the Lechuza pon is built up with a couple of different components. First of all, it is pumice in Lechuza pon. The main part of that is pumice. But you also have lava rock, and you have zeolite, and you have long-term nutrient pellets. Now, in that mix, in the mix we use, you have pumice, you have clay, and long-term nutrient pellets. So it's almost the same thing here, but they're using zeolite instead of clay. And the reason of that being that the pumice is not able to, it doesn't have a cation exchange capacity. It means it doesn't have the ability to bind nutrients when you give fertilizer to it. But zeolite has that capacity. It has a cation exchange capacity. So Lechuza is using zeolite instead of clay here. So, and it actually works very well. We have been using that. We have been using that for a couple of years. However, and this is a big one, the Lechuza pon is actually created to be an intermediate in the Lechuza self-watering system. So when you have a Lechuza pot, the Lechuza pon goes down into the bottom, in between the water and the soil that you plant your plant in. So the Lechuza pon not only it's not created not only to thrive, make the roots thrive, it has a creation purpose to wick up water from the bottom of that self-watering system up to the soil that you are planting in. And so that is what it's optimized for. And one of the reasons is that the Lechuza pon has a fairly small grain size. And the size of the grain of the pumice, in this case, actually determines how much water it will suck up, how much capillary force this substrate will have. So what we found is that the Lechuza pon, because it has such a small grain size, will actually wick up or take up a lot more water than if you use pumice with a larger grain size or clay with larger grain sizes. So yes, the Lechuza pon works very fine. However, if you're going to be planting plants entirely in Lechuza pon, you need to consider what type of a plant it is. Because if it is a plant that doesn't want a lot of moisture, doesn't want a lot of water, then maybe that substrate is not perfect for that plant. However, it works very fine otherwise, but it's wicking up a little bit too much water to be able to work with all types of indoor plants. Question number 6. My corn plant has only one branch, and it's 6 feet long and top heavy, as all of the leaves are on the tip of the branch. If I cut that branch off near the main trunk, will it die due to the plant not being able to photosynthesize without any leaves? Very good question. Now we have a All You Need to Know About Dracaena's video, and we have a Q&A video that is specific to pruning a Dracaena. So please watch those 2 videos. But your question here is concerning that you are afraid that you only have one stem or one branch that has leaves on it. And if you cut that down, you will injure the plant because it doesn't have any leaves anymore. My advice to you is that you will probably not have a problem with this by cutting it. But make sure, as usual, that your plant is feeling really well. If you can see on the plant that it's growing, it's active, right now during springtime is a perfect time to make that cut as well, if the plant is feeling well. And you can also add some fertilizer to when you water the plant to start to build up so that it has an energy positive. It's really, really feeling well. Then you can go in and make that cut. And what will happen is that the plant will use all of that stored nutrients, all of that stored starches and sugars inside of it to start to create new buds, which means that it doesn't have to have a lot of leaves to keep photosynthesizing. It's going to be using all of its stored energies to make those new buds at that cut you've made and start to grow. And it will probably happen quite fast. Now, by fast, I don't mean that it will take a couple of days or a couple of weeks, because when you make a cut at a Dracaena, it usually takes a very long time to get new leaves at that cut. But it will go a little bit faster than if you had a lot of other leaves, because the plant will be a little bit stressed to get those leaves out and start the photosynthesizing again. But I don't think you should worry. What I recommend you to do is make that cut if it's feeling really, really well, and use the cuts, the cutting. Look at our video and make new plants from that cutting. So if the mother plant should die, if something happens to that, then at least you have the cuttings that you can replant, repot, and you can continue to grow those instead. Question number 7. I have a water wicking system in a Maranta plant, and it's very happy. I don't use pumice, but a pretty good draining potting soil with perlite. My question is, what do we do when it's time to repot in a bigger pot with a water wicking system like the one we have in our video, as the plant grows bigger and it has large water root system in the bottom of the pot? Very good question here. Now, this is concerning our video, the easiest way to make a self-watering system. Now, if you haven't watched that video, go and check that out, and then you can watch my answer here after that. Because the question is quite good. What should we do when you have a lot of water roots down in your outer pot? Do you have to repot that plant? Now, I have a plant here. This is actually my own personal private plant. And this plant is a Hoya that has been standing in this pot for over 10 years. I think we are going on 11 or 12 years now. And I have never repotted this, never. Now, this system is a manufactured system by a big company, but it works in the same way as your wicking system does here. So what happens here is that you will get a lot of water roots here that is going to come out of those small holes in the bottom, and take up space where you have the water. Now, like I said, I have not repotted this plant and it's feeling really well. It actually grows quite fiercely and I have to cut it 4 or 5 times a year to keep it in this size. So, but what I do with a couple of years in between, when it gets to be like this, like it is now, you have almost the entire water reservoir in the bottom is filled with roots. What I do is that I prune these roots. I cut them. And I make sure that I don't cut away too much. But I start to cut a lot of them off and leave some of them and make sure that what you leave is coming out of the pot, of course, so that you don't cut away all of the roots. But you can cut this with a sharp scissor and just reduce that ball and then put it back in the pot again. And it will start to regrow roots, water roots down there. When it looks like this, you have to do that. And I never want this plant to be as big as possible. I want it to be in this size. That's why I never repot this. Because as long as I have it in this pot and I do that small thing with the roots, I cut the roots every 2 or 3 years. I cut them back a little bit. It's actually going to be just fine in this small pot. It can live like this for 30 years, 40 years without any problems. But, and I think I can see in your question here that what you want is for your plants to grow as big as possible. You want them to be big. You want to repot and make it a very, very big pot. Now, then you have to do something else. And that is you have to repot the entire plant. And that is not easy. I have to say that. When you have this type of a system, it's not easy. But you will probably have to cut up this plastic pot here and try and cut it all the way into the different holes here and try to surgically remove the plastic here. And then you have to repot it in a bigger container and try and get a lot of these water roots through the holes of that new container so that they will go down and continue to be water roots. If you do that, and you only have to do that maybe every 4, 5, or 6 years or something, your plant can get even more bigger and grow even faster. But if you do not want your plant to be as big as possible, this will do. It will suffice. You don't have to repot it in anything. Just make some cuts every 2, 3 years when you see that the roots become too large. Question number 8. I have 2 questions. Will it be all right for the plant if I put it in its potting medium directly in a metal galvanized pot, such as the IKEA soccer? And will it be all right for the plant if I use zeolite as the bottom layer in a self-watering system? Okay, question number 1 is it okay if I put the plant in a galvanized metal pot? I would never recommend anybody to put any type of plant in a metal container. The reason being that metal can be too hot in the summer. When sunlight hits that metal, it becomes, you can burn yourself on that metal. And that is not good for the roots. They will be in a container that is too hot. And on the other hand, it can also get really, really cold during the winter time. So you have a the temperature of the roots will vary quite a lot from day to night and also during the seasons. So if you have a metal container or a metal pot, what I recommend you to do is to plant your plant in a plastic pot or a plot made of ceramic or something, and then put that pot inside of the metal container, if you need to have a metal container. Now what you can do also is that you can put some styrofoam in between the metal outer pot and the inside plastic pot. Styrofoam here, because that will act as a cover for heat and cold. So then you don't have that problem, and you can still have a metal container if you need to have it. Now the question number 2 is that in a self-watering system, can you use zeolite as the bottom layer, as the water layer down? And I would say yes, it should probably work quite fine. However, I must say that I don't have enough experience about zeolite to say that I would really recommend it. I have experience because that water storage downstairs, it can be almost anything. The sole purpose of the leca that we use instead in the bottom is just to separate, to have something that can separate the water from the soil. So if it's leca or zeolite or pumice or gravel even, doesn't really matter. What matters here is that you have a water reservoir for water roots to go down and to have a lot of water for your plant. But I think that zeolite would work perfectly. And it also has cation exchange capacity. So it has you have a medium down there that actually can absorb nutrients when you add fertilizer to your system. So it should work quite fine. So if you try this, don't hesitate to make a comment in 6 months or something to tell us if it worked fine or if something happened to your plant. Question number 9. How to have Dracaena stem as thick as possible? Because if you cut it, it will grow a newer stem on the side instead. And that's true. The Dracaena works like that. If you have a stem that you make a cutting of, it will produce new buds and create new stems from that mother stem. But almost every type of Dracaena has fairly thin stems. You will never get a really, really thick stem from a Dracaena. The only Dracaena that has a really thick stem is the Dracaena massangeana, because that variety you can get really, really thick stems from. But you get that thick stem by just letting it grow, cutting it off, letting it grow, cutting it off, and so on. By doing that, by making new shoots and then cutting them off, making the plant bigger, it means that the more solar panels it has, the more sunlight it can absorb, the more water it will have flowing through your system, and the thicker the stem will be. But the other types of Dracaenas usually never gets a really thick stem. So if you want a plant that has a thick stem, the Dracaena is not the plant for you. Choose something else that gets a really thick stem. But if you want a Dracaena that has a relatively thick stem, use the Dracaena massangeana or the Cornplant. We actually have a video telling you on how to make your plants thicker and bigger. So go and check that out as well if you want to know exactly on how to make your plants feel really well and become thicker and bigger. Question number 10. I live in Sweden and had a question about pumice and growing vegetables. Can I add pumice instead of vermiculite, which is popularly recommended, in my raised bed vegetable garden, along with soil and compost to improve in water retention and improve air drainage in the soil? It has become very popular in recent seasons to be using vermiculite, mixing that with your soil when you're growing vegetables in your garden. And yes, you can add pumice instead of vermiculite, and it has almost exactly the same things. And you're actually naming them yourself here. You will get a better water water retention in the soil, but you will also get a better drainage because the soil tends to bind too much water. So by adding that pumice and mixing that with the soil, you will be getting more aeration in the soil, and the pumice itself will also absorb and hold water for the roots. So yes, you can use pumice just as well as vermiculite. It will work very, very good. Question number 11. I'm having trouble with edema. Is it because I'm overwatering? The plant itself is healthy, leaves pointing up, dark green, lots of new leaves, but ever so often I get a little rust-colored spots on the underside of the new leaf. I've heard it was due to watering. Now this is concerning our video, all you need to know about Ficus lobata, or fiddle leaf fig. Now, first of all, I think that you are correct in assuming that this is edema you get on your fiddle leaf fig. We've actually had that on a couple of fiddle leaf figs, the exact same thing. The newest leaves that are starting to emerge, starting to grow, gets some dark or get some reddish spots underneath the leaf. And I think that this is edema. Now, what is edema? Edema is, we people can get edema as well. What it means is it's a physiological thing where your body is absorbing too much water, absorbing too much water. But in plants, you cannot get edema by overwatering your plants. If you overwater your plants, what will happen is that the roots will start to die. It's not that when you add water and add water, the roots will suck up more and more water. It doesn't work like that. The roots can only absorb as much water as they are capable of doing. But if you get too much water, you won't get any air around the roots and the roots will start to die. What happens here, and this is just something in our experience here, that it can happen quite often that the newest leaf on the fiddle leaf fig gets edema. Now, what happens is that the fiddle leaf fig has these enormous big leaves to it, which means that there is a lot of water passing up and down in this system. Now, like I've said before, 85% of all the water inside of a plant is there for air conditioning. So what that water is actually doing is that it's going out to the leaves, it's evaporating from the leaves, which means that it's sucking up more water from the roots, and it's keeping the plant at a certain temperature so that it doesn't overheat when it's very, very hot. Now what will happen if it is very, very hot? What will happen is that that new leaf is going to get all of that water that is actually going out to those big, big leaves is going to start to come up to that small leaf as well. And you get too much water at that spot. And what happens then is that the cells are getting too much strain of water. It gets too much of a pressure. It gets too much pressure so that the cells explode. They damage. And that is what you see on the backside of the leaves. Those are the red spots on the backside of the leaves. Those are the cells that can't handle all that water and they explode. Now with the fiddle leaf fig, it usually is not a problem because as that leaf continues to grow, when it becomes bigger, that problem goes away. Those dots disappear over time and the leaves get to be good and healthy. So the problem usually shows itself when the leaf is very small. And I think it has to do with that pressure of all that water that is in that plant. But that little leaf, it's not ready for all that water yet. So, but you get edema Like say, you can usually get edema when you're growing tomatoes in a greenhouse. And you get that because the greenhouse gets really, really hot and really, really humid, so that the plant can't regulate the heat inside of itself. It wants to suck up a lot of water and it wants to perspire that, it wants that to evaporate from the leaves. But because it's that hot and that humid, the water doesn't evaporate. So all that water is inside of the plant, and that causes the edema, that causes the cells to explode. So what you do in that greenhouse is that you put in a fan or something, or you open up so that you get a lot more air inside of it, so that you lower the temperature, you lower the humidity inside of the greenhouse. And that usually takes care of the edema. It goes away. This could have happened at your place. Now, I don't know anything else more than this, but you could have had a very hot period or a very humid period that causes that edema to form on that new leaf. But don't worry about it. It will probably just disappear. It's not common, but it's quite common in the fiddle leaf fig to get a little bit of edema on the new leaves. Don't worry, it will probably go away. And if it doesn't, make sure that you have good aeration for the plant so that it can transport that water inside of it and control that air conditioning inside of the plant, and so that it doesn't get too much water inside to cause those cells to explode. That is all for today. We are so happy for all of your questions. If you have more questions for us, if you have videos you want us to produce for you, please don't hesitate to make those comments in the commentary section. And we will try and make more Q&A videos and more videos for you. Now, if you're not a subscriber, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like as well. The more people that are watching, the more videos we can make for you. So until next time, hej då!